Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're close to the bottom of page 1447. Let's do a little review here on what we learned in the past classes. And a general overview. So, Ayin Beis is the theme of interface. Mamutza, the interface between the divine and existence, between the transcendent and the immanent, between the divine levels that are completely beyond existence, integrating them and internalizing them in the divine that's within existence. This has been the theme from page 1 throughout Ayin Beis. Who implements, who executes, and accomplishes this mission of this integration? That's the Avodah of Neshamas Yisrael, the souls of Israel, the Neshamas that are rooted in the highest levels, in the Etzem, as we learned, Shmoi, HaKolol, V'atzmusei, Helema Atzmi. So Neshamas from there, being like children of God, Bonim Atem. So Chelik Elekam Mamash, like a piece of godliness, not obviously literally, but they manifest that power. These neshamas travel downward through the whole Seder Shtalsha that God used to create existence, all the way to the world called Tachtonim, the lowest world of Elam Hazeh HaGashmi V'Achumri. That the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36 in Tanya, is Tachten Shein Tachten Lamatim Mimena, in the fact that the divine is completely concealed. Neshamas come into this world with their core inherent personality, divine personality, but now they also manifest and engage with existence, not in a state of being aloof, but they're involved. The neshama is mislabish in a guf and a nefesh abamis, and that's each one of us. Now, how does the neshama do so? Not, as I said, not in the state of remaining apart. It becomes one with the body, but to the point you cannot distinguish between a neshama and a guf. Like, which part is your body, which part is your neshama? It becomes so manifest within. So sometimes this is called, this is a tremendous yerida atzuma, a tremendous descent that the neshama goes from its highest levels of divine revelation and beyond, actually, into a world like this. But that's the only way to transform this world. You can't do it from a distance, and you can't do it from above, because that's exactly not the kavanah. The whole intention is dirah b'tachtenim, al yedei tachtenim, through the tachtenim and the gidrei and in the parameters of tachtenim. So that requires entering there. You can't just do it from a pedestal or from an ivory tower. So that's why the slapshus neshama beguf is not a simple process. The neshama doesn't want to come down to this world. The al korcha chatachai, it has to be compelled to come. And it's sometimes even called the golus of neshama lamata, the golus that the soul in Gan Eden, in the higher spiritual worlds, is basking and living in its own environment like a fish in water. Nenim miziv ashchina, benefiting from the divine revelation. But in this world, that's not the case. Here, everything comes with effort and difficulties and challenges. Like we learned earlier, the Nefesh Abamis conceals and impedes and battles. And the whole Tanya is based, the battle between the animal soul and the divine soul. So it's called a golus. It's like it's being held, it's like in captivity. However, the neshama doesn't come unarmed. It comes filled with resources on many levels. The resource of its very nature of being a divine neshama. The other resources that the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that Hashem sides with it, that it has the natural moyach shalat alev, self-control, and many, many other resources, which I'm not going to go through right now. But to bring it back to Ayin Beis, here he's talking about the resources that the neshama receives from Torah Oyer, that illuminates and gives us power. By Mattan we were given the blueprint, a roadmap for life that directs and guides us, so we're not all alone in a dark world trying to figure out what to do with our lives. There's a Torah. The Torah comes with Einei Ha'eda, with Talmidei Chachamim, leaders. They're called the eyes of the people. They're like eyes that help us also guide and direct us, giving us the vision, giving us clarity. And we have the Malachim, The Malachim are not many people see. Our first knee-jerk reaction is Malachim are like white-winged elves flying around. No, Malachim are divine agents. They're divine ambassadors. They're divine energy, essentially. A Malach is called a shliach. And this is God inserted into, say, the Ishtalshlus, not just the Ishtalshlus of the worlds, Atzilus, Tabriya, Yitzira, Asiya, and not just the 10 spheres, which are the very building blocks of existence, but also Malachim that help support our Avodah, both helping us elevate our Avodah from bottom up and to draw down the energy, like we learned, that the Malachim serve the role like the digestive system in the body of the Bnei Mayim, which is like Homu Mayai. They're like the innards, the stomach, the gut, that processes, distributes, and delivers the nutrients to the entire body, the same thing the Malachim do for the Neshamas. So even though the Neshamas are rooted higher than Malachim, but when Neshamas come down below, we can use all the support we get. The Malachim are, that's that support that they give us. That's why you find by Yaakov that he had Malachim that escorted him when he went to Charan, when he came back to Eretz Yisrael. We have Malachim that escort us all the time. Every Friday night we sing Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Asharis. And we know Malachim are basically support. They assist us in our work. Obviously, they're invisible to the naked eye, but they're forces of energy, and that's what we've been discussing. Now, among the Malachim itself, who is the Mamuna and the Melech of all Malachim? Who is the supervisor and the manager, so to speak, the head of the department of Malachim, and the king? So he says that's Malach Matat, sometimes known as Malach Machol or Chanoich. Said that on page 1446. So Matat plays a central role in the interface of helping the divine energy of Atzilus enter into Biyah. Now, this is specifically, as I said, the neshama comes down below, but additionally said Bizman HaGolus. So not just the Golus of the neshama and the Guf in general, that's throughout history, even from the beginning of creation, even the times of Beis HaMikdash. But now we're talking about Golus, the very exile, not the time of the Beis HaMikdash, after the destruction of the temple or after the Chet HaEgel. So it's the Chatoim, Mipnei Chata'enu Galinim Artzenu, it's the sins that create a disalignment and they block that the flow. We can't get straight from Ur Havaya, which would be Zah, direct from the main artery. So the main artery channels through the filter called Malchus and Matat, like a garment that draws it into Biyah. So Moshe was the level of Havaya. He was able to plug in and wanted to plug in straight to the original source. But Yeshua, talking now the second level of Yeshua, once he becomes a leader and he's now in Biyah. So even though he's a leader, but he's the Reish of a lower level, the head. So he responds to and draws from that malach matat that comes to him. The malach Hashem said, "Hine shelach lefnecha, malach. I'm going to be sending you a malach." That's the malach matat that draws to Yeshua from the Eir of Atzilus. So matat is, as we explained, also unique among angels because the other angels, the divine energy is more concealed, and that's why they can be seen as an entity of their own. Malach Matat, however, is transparent bittul, but still, it's still an emtsai. No matter how you twist it, it's still not Havaya Atzmei, as he explained on top of page 1447. Especially if Matat comes down into Bria and then into Yetzirah, so then for sure, it's now Matat is not Havaya Atzmei. And now he compares this to Yecheskel, the prophet, who Ani B'techa Geila, in the state of Golus after the destruction of the first temple. Today is Shivasa B'Tammuz, so it's the beginning, it is relevant to our time right now. Today's beginning of the 3 weeks. So Yecheskel, because of the Golus, did not see Havaya directly, he sees it through the lens of the Merkava. Pnei Arya, Pnei Sher, as he said, because he's on that level. But in contrast, during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, like it was by Mattan Torah, then it was seen directly upon him, experience the divine face to face, meaning without the filter, without the intermediary. So based on that, the Rebbe Rashab says, so therefore Zman HaBayis then is higher than Yeshua, because Yeshua needed the angel, the Malach Matat. And Zman HaBayis is a direct link. And he brings the Eitz Chaim, that this is the sixth elevation of Malchus, where Malchus is face to face on the same stature as is Zah. The moon and the sun are the same stature. Brings from other places as well. The Bechai says this is Zah and Malchus. The Torah says that in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and the same thing as Zman HaBayis. I'm sorry, but Mattan Torah, and the same thing as Zman HaBayis, they're equal, Malchus and Zah. And that means also Ayin Ba'ayin, the other B'chai, means eye to eye, that the vision below, which is Yichud Tata, that existence is a yesh, and the divine is the mysterious Ayin, above the novelty, that vision is infused with a vision from above, Ayin Ba'ayin, that vision of Yichud Elah, that the yesh amiti is above and the Ayin is below, because the Ayin is nullified, existence is nullified. So it's a joining of the two perspectives, which of course connects to the whole theme in general of Ayin Beis here, which is about the eye, about vision. The vision of the eye, when the vision enters into the very socket, into the klei ha'ayin, into the eye, and there it's limited and it needs siyua, it needs the support of the malachim of light outside of it. And then there's the core vision, as it is in the essence of the soul, etzem hanefesh, and there the vision, there the eyes, like the neshama says, they are above. But as the neshamas come down below, here we live in existence, and from existence we have to come to discover the divine. But ultimately, ayin ba'ayin, which was experienced by Mattan Torah, times in history, these watershed moments, as I explained, Beis HaMikdash, by Mattan Torah, Yetzias Mitzrayim, that there were times that there was this higher revelation, where there was a joining of the higher and the lower. Now, the second half of the parentheses addresses the issue of the Ovis, Moshe, and the Jewish people in the time of Moshe. Because as I said, when you start really looking at this, you also get a somewhat of a historical panorama of the different stages in history. Remember, the story of the interface of Ayin Beis, the story of uniting and integrating Hashem Echad, Yichud Kudshe Bricha V'Shchinta, on all the levels, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, is the story of all of history. So in different points in history, there were the watershed moments where there was a higher state of revelation, for that moment, at least temporarily. L'asad lavu, when Mashiach comes, there'll be the full fusion and the total integration. But throughout history, there were different experiences. So Mattan Torah, of course, stands out. The Beis HaMikdash stands out. That's in a time when there are less interfaces, meaning that the Malach was not needed. We know Moshe Rabbeinu is even high, also higher. So now he goes. And what about the Ovis before Mattan Torah? We also know they were on a high level. So though we learned earlier that Ovis had the Gili of Shem Shaddai, because Shmi Havaya Eloheinu died to them, they did not have Havaya. Moshe has the level of Havaya Atzmai. So now he sums up here. We're going to talk about the comparison. I'm just reviewing the comparison between these different levels. So he says like this. The Zohar says that the Ovis were able to see, have a Chaman Megav, within the outer, the external colors, the outer revealed colors, they were able to see that which was within. So then what's the difference in Moshe and the Ovis? He says, and it brings three different levels here. Moshe saw the divine like through a transparent glass. Aspaklaria Me'ira, it's called. The Ovis saw his slapshus, Aspaklaria Me'ira, and Aspaklaria She'ena Me'ira. So it begins with a transparent revelation, but then it goes through a translucent one. And the rest of the prophets, this includes Yecheskel and others, saw it only through translucent. That's why the Misnava, their prophecy was koi, not zeh. Moshe was Misnava, he prophesied with the word zeh. Zeh means point, you. Zeh, this. Madabat's boiva zeh, that's in front of you. That's called a transparent revelation. When you say koi, it means like something. It means you're not seeing it directly, it's only comparing it to something. It's like a reflection. And through a translucent, that's how the Ovis. What about the Eden themselves?
What's the difference between transparent and translucent? I don't see the difference.
Transparent means translucent is like a shaded glass, and transparent is like a clear glass. Okay, now what about the Jewish people, the Neshamas Yisrael? One more thing we want to say here. The Ramaz brings that ponim beponim and ponim el ponim, there's a difference. When you say ponim beponim, you're saying the ponim of Arich Ampin in the panim of Zah. So that's a higher level. Panim el panim that says by Moshe is arich ampin itself. So basically, we have here several levels here. We have Zah and Malchus equal. Then we have arich and Zah, and then we have arich itself, which is Moshe Rabbeinu. And all this is the Gilui. One second, before I continue, the Shamas Yisrael, he says, in the days of Moshe, they were not obviously on the same level of Moshe. They were like the Ovis, he says. Then the Shamas Yisrael, but you may Moshe, Bisman Bayis, he compares them to the Ovis, which is basically a combination of transparent, but also going through a translucent state. So it's somewhat concealed through a mamutza, not as much as totally translucent, but there is that combination. Okay. Then the final piece in the parentheses is, but however, all these levels that we're talking about is still not the level in Golus, still not the level of Yeshua, and not the level of Golus, because this is all a slapshus madregas of Atzilus. And Atzilus, everything is in a revealed state, not a kahelim. Even when there's a slapshus of one level to the other, in Atzilus, there's of course higher and lower. But even the lower level is still in a state of revelation. As the Rebbe Rashab explains. So no matter whether it's the level of Zah and Malchus equal, or the level of the 10 spheres they're receiving from Arichampin, all of that is a state of revelation. And that was what was like by Mattan Torah and by the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why it says, Kol ha'am ro'im es ha'kelis, the whole nation saw the sounds and they heard the sights, because there was a total fusion, because it was a Gilia Lakus that was higher than the distinctions of the structure. By contrast, in the time of Yeshua, you need the Malach, you need the Matat. And Yecheskel saw it through the eyes of the Merkava in Yitzirah. But now we're going to continue, and he's going to explain this even further to understand the difference between Mattan Torah and Golus. So bottom line, Beis HaMikdash and Golus as well. So what we to sum this up is there are all different levels of how much we need, what interfaces we need to be able to connect to the divine. So Mattan Torah and Beis HaMikdash stand out as unique times. The same thing in the days of Moshe. It was an elevated level. But after Moshe's passing and Yeshua, and then even more, once Eden went into Golus after the destruction of the first temple, that, of course, required more a mamutza, more energy, more support from some type of... So in other words, in the best times, we can directly link to Havaya, to the main artery of Havaya, like to the king himself. But in Golus, we need to have the ambassadors that represent the king in order to be able to internalize and integrate the divine energy, because we can't access it directly in the direct sense, because we have too many impediments that are a result of the sins that disaligned. It's like someone who's not in the healthiest state needs additional support to build up their health until we finish the Avodah. When Mashiach comes, then obviously we reclaim, and even on the highest level, the direct link, and that will be the total fusion of the highest and the highest levels and the lowest levels. But as long as we're not in the state of Mashiach and Geula, even if we're at the threshold, this is the support that we need, and that's what he's been explaining. But he's now going to explain further what is the Gilui of Mattan Torah and Beis HaMikdash, then go back to what the Malachim or Matat, and then continue this discussion. But it's going to go for a while. It's a back and forth, because it's all about what support we have in doing our Avodah. I did mention... One second. I'm going to stop for questions. 1 second. I did mention, I say it again, that a lot of this is based on page 1408, he began the discussion. He said, we'll understand it by the Pasuk in Hazinu, you say, V'venhu, Yisronehu, Ki'ishin Einai. So there it talks about God surrounding and shaping us, Ki'ishin Einai, which is like the pupil of his eye. That is based on a mimer from the Rebbe, from the Alter Rebbe, that was said either Shabbos Shuva or Sukkot, or maybe both times, Tov Kuf Samach Zayin. And it's printed at the end of Tov Kuf Samach Vav. Same Maimori Admura Zaken. Why am I mentioning it? Because it's not just the piece on page 1408. I realize as we keep going, that he's really developing the themes in that mimer, and this will go on for quite a while, all the way till at least let me see, probably till around page 1455. So ultimately, it's not just based on that mimer, but that mimer plays a central. It's like almost foundational elements of everything we're discussing here. With other Maimorim, as I've been describing, the Maimon the Alter Rebbe said at his grandson's wedding, and other Maimorim that we refer to. So when you look in that Maimon, it creates a little cohesiveness, because that Maimon, of course, is shorter. Here we're talking about over 100 pages, probably. I say Tov Ches till Tov Nun Hey. No, more like 50 pages. Here it's like 50 pages, but I just wanted to point that out. So we're going to continue learning now, and but I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
Beis Rishon only, right? Everything that he spoke about.
He has not mentioned Beis Sheni yet. No.
Also, could you tell me what is the Rosh Tevis Dalet Beis Beis Reish? Few lines before. K'mishkosu Beis Chaim Shal Miyut HaYareach Perek Beis Dalet Beis Beis.
The Beis Rishon.
Okay, fair. So you're saying clearly Beis Rishon.
I said that. That's explicit several times. He also said it by Yecheskel, came after Beis Rishon. Yeah. He's not getting into Beis Sheni, which is a lower Gilead Beis Rishon, but it's still a Beis HaMikdash. We'll see. Maybe he'll mention it. So far he hasn't.
In Beis Sheni, it said Godoi Li the Beis Hazeh or Beis Sheni.
Yeah, but he's not discussing it. So what am I going to say right now? In some ways it's Godel, in some ways it's less. It didn't have the Hey Dvarim, it didn't have the Odin, the Luchas. Any other questions before I continue? Okay. I also mentioned that the language on this page, a big part of it, not the parentheses, before and after the parentheses, from the Likutei Torah, Hazinu, the beginning of Kanesha Yoir, that he actually quotes it, and he's explaining that mimer actually. So let's continue now. New paragraph, bottom of page 1447. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Va'inyan hu, and the inyan in all of this, shehoya gili b'chinas Atzilus mamash hazel b'Mattan Torah. That which we discussed, that the gili of Atzilus mamash, which was by Mattan Torah, sheyigila Atzilus mamash lamato. Well, I should change the nigun. By inyan hu, the inyan is that this, what we just discussed, he's saying like this: sheyigila b'chinas Atzilus mamash. Now there was the gili of Atzilus mamash, not Atzilus as it goes into Biyah, into Bri Yitzir Nasiya. Shazel Mattan Torah, sheyigila Atzilus mamash lamato. That by Mattan Torah was a gili. That's why there was the Chola Shemim Esanira V'rein Esanishma, because it was the gili of Atzilus mamash. So it's a continuation of the previous paragraph. They made it a new paragraph, but really it flows from there. So Gili Elikiz Blishu Mischalkos, he says Va'inu, because there was the gili of Atzilus mamash. U'kamosh Kosav Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that God descended on Har Sinai, Havaya. Vayered Havaya al Har Sinai. The Hainu Gili Er Atzilus. What does that mean? What do you mean? Where was God before he descended? He was always, he's Malay Kol Aretz Kvede, Eineit Movade. Less asar ponimene. God is everywhere. So what happened by Mattan Torah? It wasn't just that God is everywhere. He's everywhere but concealed. By Mattan Torah was a surge, a gili of Atzilus on earth. That's what happened. So it wasn't just the regular divine revelation that sustains existence all the time. There was a special gili, a gili coming from Havaya of Atzilus, being revealed in this world. And that too is the Gili, like you mentioned already before, by the Beis HaMikdash. What makes the Beis HaMikdash so special? Because I'm telling you, build for me a sanctuary, a temple, and I will dwell among you. What does that mean? That without the temple, the Shekhinah is not dwelling among us. Even though God fills all of existence and is there, but we're talking about a Gili, a special Gili, and he says this is the Gili of Atzilus. Shezeh inyan. This is the inyan that we say about the Aron. When Hashem spoke to Moshe, what did it say? Ben Shnei Badei Aron. He spoke from the two handles, the two rods that were on the side of the Aron. Says Tzimtzum Shchinte Ben Shnei Badei Aron. That the Eibishter so-called concentrated his Shekhinah in that particular place, in the Holy of Holies, on the Aron, between the two Badei Aron. Even though God is everywhere, but there was a special higher revelation of Atzilus, Ben Shnei Badei Aron, Shezeu Hamshachas B'chinas Pnimius Ha'er. So this is referring to a special revelation of Pnimius Ha'er. Not Chitzenius, not an outer dimension, but an inner dimension. So just to give a simple example, when you are speaking to people and you're communicating in a nice, pleasant way, so you reveal a part of yourself to them, and you have an interaction. But then suddenly your son or your daughter or someone you deeply love comes over to you. And what happens? Your whole being, your smile, your whole being begins to radiate, and you reveal a lot deeper and more intimate part of yourself. Now, where was the intimate part before? It was also there, but it was not available. It was not being expressed to everybody. So when you say the Shekhinah, Eibishter says, build for me a Mikdash, and I will dwell among you, that's the deeper Pnimi, it's a more intimate divine revelation. So Mattan Torah and Beis HaMikdash, that means Tzimtzum Shchinte Ben Shnei Badei Aron, that the Shekhinah now is present. What's the Tzimtzum? The Tzimtzum means, first of all, it's only in that area, it's not everywhere. And it's so the focus here is not so much on the Tzimtzum as conceal. Tzimtzum means more on the directing it, the harnessing, the channeling of it. But it is a Tzimtzum because it's in a particular location. But the focus here is on the revelation part. So the Pnimius Ha'er, the Rebbe Rashab here is an indication of when the Rebbe Rashab was writing this. Listen to this. In the parentheses he adds, Ayin Masha Kosav, B'dibra Maskol v'Hashem Heilech Lifneim, Reish Ayin Ches. So he's referring to his own mimer. Tov Reish Ayin Ches. We know Ayin Beis, volume 2 concludes in Tov Reish Ayin Vov, when the Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch. Vayera Tov Reish Ayin Vov. But he continued writing volume 3. And we always want to know when was he writing it, because he never delivered it, so we don't have any record of when the Rebbe Rashab spoke these Mamorim. He never spoke them. It's called the Chelik Shalei Nemar. He never said it. So here's one of the hints. He tells us to look in the Maimer of Tov Reish Ayin Ches. So clearly, this was written, can be earlier than that Maimer, which is essentially Pasha Kisisa Tov Reish Ayin Ches. Well, he's going to later refer to a Maimer in Purim Tov Reish Ayin Ches. We've found that basically till Ayin Ches for sure the Rebbe Rashab was writing Ayin Beis, which would tell you that he's been writing it now for 6 years because it began in Ayin Beis. Now we're in Ayin Ches already. He's referring to. Anyway, that Maimer, I want to look it up, but that Maimer is actually on the pasuk that he referred to earlier, Hashem Heilech Lifneihem, that he said before, that before the Chet HaEgel, Hashem himself Heilech Lifneihem. And then after the Chet, it says, Hini anechi sheleich malach, I'll send a malach. So there's a Maimer in this in Tov Reish Ayin Ches. I will look it up and I'll give you my report once I look what it says there. But I wanted to just interestingly indicate, so we know this is an Ayin Ches when he wrote this. Okay. So he's explaining, basically he's elaborating on the Gilui of what we talked before about both, not like Yecheskel Golos, but we're talking about now the time of Mattan Torah and the time of the Beis HaMikdash. So it's a Gilui Pnimius of Atzilus itself. Any questions?
Why is it called Tzimtzum Shchinosoi? It's a very high Gilui.
Anyway, I just explained it. Did you hear what I said?
You said it condensed.
Anyway,
I have a question, but I don't know.
I'm not going to go over it again. I just said it. I thought I qualified.
I have a question, but it's more related to davening. If it's okay to ask, or I can wait till the shir is over. But it's got to do with the Shekhinah and davening and minyan. You want me to wait till the end of the shir?
So we'll do it after the shir. Fine.
Yeah.
Ubatzilus lo yesh is chalkus madregas. And Atzilus, there isn't any distinction of levels. So clearly the Rebbe Rashab is not going to be elaborating on the Likkutei Torah. Because remember, the Likkutei Torah is the one that says that by Mattan Torah was a Gilia Likus, Belishum Ischalkus, Ribe HaMadregas. Rako Yeroim Gilia Klos Achayz B'Shef Eliki. So they saw the very main artery of divine energy without Ischalkus Madregas. The Rebbe Rashab is adding that that's the revelation of Atzilus. He's saying Atzilus is no Ischalkus HaMadregas. Now, of course, anyone knows a little about Atzilus knows Atzilus has 10 spheres. Atzilus is not Akudim. Akudim, you could say 10 energies in one container. In Ak, they're not even containers. Lifnei Atzimtzum, for sure there's no Ischalkus HaMadregas. But the Rebbe Rashab is saying clearly that Atzilus, there's no distinction of levels. He's going to explain now what he means. Now, a little introduction before we continue on. This isn't a tangent. Because remember, the whole point is to explain to us how we can interface and integrate Elokus godliness with existence. Now, godliness in its highest levels, there's no ischalkus, chaz v'shalom. There's no period, there's no distinctions. Hashem echad, we've been learning. Hamayrik be'echad. It's all achdus hapshuta. Existence is all about diversity and multitudes and distinctions and plenty of different levels. We want to join these two. So Atzilus serves as an interface between Achdus Hashem and the Misham Yepored, the distinctions and the levels that will begin in Bria. But Atzilus does have levels. But what he's going to explain is that the levels are all permeated. They all feel they're all essentially united in divine unity. So essentially, you could have an example. For example, when we stood by a Fabring with the Rebbe. So even though everybody was different jobs, Ein Deis Ein Shavas, different opinions, but sometimes you're standing in the presence of something great. Though you have Ischalka, there are different levels and different people, but the Rebbe's glow and aura and level united everyone. You say, Atem Nitzavim Hashem Elokeichem, Atem Nitzavim Hashem Elokeichem Chaim Kul, Atem Nitzavim Flei Hashem Elokeichem. And then he continues on and says, from Rashi Shavteichem to Chete Ve'etzecha Ve'shev Memecha. He enumerates all the levels from the highest, the leaders, all the way to the water carriers and the wood choppers. But Atem Nitzavim Mayim, we're all standing together as one. So the fact is, Atzilus, even though there are levels, but what is felt is not the levels, it's felt the divine unity. Chesed and Gvura and Teferes and all of them exist, but they all feel they're all channels of godliness. It's like you think of a symphony, even though there are many instruments and many musicians, but they're all playing one song, one music, all united in that sense. He's going to explain now what that means. But the relevance I just explained because it's critical, because it's a place where you have a meeting between Achdus and existence. It's in unity. So he says, but Atzilus lo yesh chalkos madregas. That was the revelation of Mattan Torah and Beis HaMikdash. Hagam, next page, turning to page 1448. Hagam sheyesh sham eses spheres. And even though we know that in Atzilus there are 10 spheres, Umavur bekama duchtin, and it's explained in a number of discourses, or kama drushim, kama duchtin, sheba Atzilus hem b'bchinas ischalkus. And Atzilus, they are distinct levels. They're not, chesed is not gvura, gvura is not chesed. So why are you saying, based on the Torah, that Atzilus lo yesh ischalkus madregas? Does it have these differences or doesn't have differences? And he's going to elaborate. This is the difference between that which is higher than Atzilus and Atzilus. The Lamayla Atzilus are called B'chinas Achdus Mamish. Higher than Atzilus, everything is one unified whole. Shalo yesh chilukim madregas klal. There are no different levels at all. U'b'Atzilus u'b'chinas is chalkus. That's what makes Atzilus unique. Atzilus is now a full structure of Chachma, Bina, Das, all the way to Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. Yes, it's all Iyu v'Chayu Yichad, Iyu v'Gamu Yichad, but there's this chalkus. There's a full structure here. V'hein b'b'chinas Eidos b'kelim. And it's in a state of Eidos, energies within containers, to just drive the point home that there's a structure. So how do you say there's no ischalkus when the whole of Atzilus is based on a structure? So the Rebbe Rashab explains, when we say there's distinction and separation, ischalkus means distinction, different levels. It's not mamish, the madregas nivdolis v'nifrodes zemizeh. When he says ischalkus, it's not mamish ischalkus as they are separate, as nivdol, separate, and nifrad, which means apart and separate from each other. So essentially, there's ischalkus, but not ischalkus mamish as different entities. And I was going to explain what that means. So what you see here is Atzilus is something in between. Think of a healthy body. I mean, we're going to explain it inside, but I'm just giving some examples to make it easier to understand. Think of a healthy body. Would you say that you're a composite of 248 limbs? Or 75 trillion cells? No. You're one human being, a healthy human being that has trillions of cells, has millions of parts, 248 limbs, 365 sinews, nerves, veins, arteries, different organs, and so on. But it's one body. So is it ischalkus or not ischalkus? So on one hand, there's definitely one body. The brain is not the heart, and the heart is not the liver, and the liver is not the lungs, etc., etc. But there's something that coordinates them that when you look at it, you see a harmony within the diversity. What reigns most supreme is that you don't see yourself as a bunch of little parts, not even a sum of the parts. There's something that is unifying, that I am one person, whatever my name is. This is me. This me is made up of parts. Then, God forbid, if someone dissects a body and the parts are different places and they're not working together, or God forbid, in a certain disease where the parts of the body are not coordinated, or not working, then you could say it's a real hischalkus of even separation and even conflict. But he's going to explain how hischalkus, there's levels. Hischalkus doesn't always mean separation. Hischalkus could simply mean one unit made up of many different pieces that all work together. And we need that because since we need an interface between the structure of existence, which is definitely structured, and the divine unity, so Atzilus becomes that place, and Mattan and the Beis HaMikdah serve as reminders, and as I said, watershed moments in history, where there was a surge of energy that infused existence with this level of unity of Atzilus, which gives us the power that when we go into Biyah, into our world where there is absolutely differences and even conflicts, that we should have the power to bring unity even in the lowest levels of Yehuda Tata. And like we learned earlier in HaMikdah Be'echad, that even in our very physical material world that's made up of so many parts, to be able to find the unifying divine energy within all and connecting it all and reuniting it in a revealed way with which is liyachid kutshebricha v'shchinte, the yichud of Hashem Echad, of Shema that we've been learning. And who gives us the power to reach Hashem Echad? That's Birchus Yetzir, the Malachim, that help lead us in that way, because the Malachim are serving, like he said, Matat is drawing from Atzilus into Biyah. The only difference is how much you need Matat. There's Moshe, there's Mattan, Beis HaMikdash, and there's Yeshua, and there's Yecheskel. But you see here how it all comes together in the very central theme of basically bringing unity into a fragmented and divided world. So now he's going to explain what does this mean that it's not ischalkus mamish, that is the levels that are nivdolis nifrodes zemezeh. Either is separate, or either it's ischalkus made up of parts or not made up of parts. It has eses finis, like he just said. So he's now going to explain this. But I want to stop if anybody wants to ask anything that I've just said. Remember, he didn't explain it yet, but he's going to explain it. I explained it a bit as an introduction, but we'll learn it inside now. Va'inyan hu, commission is bar l'il. The inyan in this is to explain this idea of a world that's made up of parts, 10 spheres, but at the same time, it's not as chalkus mamish as in separate, or even or separate or divided entities. He says, commission is bar l'il. We learned in the Maimer, Dibra Maskul b'yem hashmini atzeres habeis hagimel. In the third b'yem hashmini atzeres, he means because in Ayin Beis itself, the Rebbe Rashab said 3 Maimarim by the name by Yem Hashmini Atzeres. So you have, I think, 2 in volume 1 and 1 in volume 2, which he's referring to here, which is on page, like they indicate below in the footnote, page 691. So what do we learn there? So we learned there, Mashaniska Loshe B'china L'mayla. There, he cited a mimer from the Alter Rebbe. What does the word B'china mean? You say B'chinas Malchus, B'chinas Zoh, B'chinas Atzilus. You'll see very, very often in Chassidus, you see B'chinas Atzilus Mamish. Why do you need the word B'china? Just say Atzilus Mamish. What does B'china come to add? So there's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe where he asked that question. Why do we use the word B'china in Kabbalah and in Chassidus? It's a very interesting question, interesting answer. So he explains, because the word B'china, just for the Hebrew, we say level, the level of. But what does B'china really mean? B'china means a measure. Like when you say you give a test, you test somebody. A test in school is called a B'china. When you interview someone and you give them a quiz them, it's a B'china. It means to be boichin kloyes v'lev. That the Eibishter is so-called exploring, evaluating. So it's basically measuring something up. That's what B'china means. So what does B'china have to do with Atzilus or Zoh, Malchus, or Chachma, or Keser? Say B'chinas Ak, B'chinas Keser. I mean, wherever you turn, you're going to find the word B'china used. So he says, we learned back then in B'yem Hashmini Atzeres HaGimel in volume 2, that when it says B'china L'mayla, what does it mean? Shezeu al derech moshel B'chinas HaKesef, she'ein hasigim uvdolim mahatev. So you take a piece of silver. So you mine silver from a silver mine, right? The silver is not pure because it has sigim, it has particles that may be made of dust or stone. You know, you find things, for example, when you talk about a diamond in the rough. And then you can extract the diamond, you polish it, you remove the excess. So the same thing is with kesef. When silver is being produced and being produced, and then when you sell silver, you can see some silver costs more than others. If it's very pure and doesn't have any particles, any what's the word I want to use? It's obviously going to be more expensive. It's called pure.
Impurities.
Impurities is another word, yes. Or same thing you fear about gold. So that's basically, so how do you do that? You measure it. You have to measure what. So he says like this. So he said there. So so you take a piece of silver, raw silver. So the sigim, the impurities, the particles are not separate from the good silver. It's mixed together. You haven't yet sifted or separated them. So what do you say when you're thinking about kesef? This is based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. So b'china, you measure it. You say that let's say it's 1 gram of silver. Saying that what are grams made of? A multi-gram. What's a gram made of? Whatever
milligrams, it is. Milligrams. You got 1,000 milligrams.
Milligrams, right? So you'll say this 1 gram of silver has 9. How many milligrams in a gram? 9, 10?
No, 1,000 milligrams in a gram. 1,000.
Oh, okay, my mistake. So 1,000. So you'd say like this: this gram of silver, 990 is silver, and 10 is that's how you measure it. That's called a b'china. He uses, I think, their example also from pharmaceutical, that a pharmacist, when they combine and they mix different compounds, the same thing. They're measuring and weighing and measuring how many parts to how many parts. The same thing when you do cooking. You say how many parts when for a pound of let's say flour, you have to add this and this amount of salt or this and this amount of oil, etc.
There's all these ratios, yeah.
Yeah, basically it's ratios, exactly. So he's saying that, so what does Bechina indicate? Bechina is that process. That's why it's called, I think, what is the name in Hebrew for, there's a name for a pharmacist. What's the name in Hebrew for a pharmacist?
Rekeach.
Rekeach, right. What is Rekeach? I think Rekeach is connected to that a bit, if I recall. Maybe I'm wrong.
Masei mirkachas.
So what does merkachas mean, the word mean?
Probably combination.
A mixture? A mixture, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a compound. So I think he brings that in the mimer as well. But anyway, bottom line, let's go back to what he's saying here. So he says like this. So initially, this silver, this kesef, nothing is separated. So he says, it's one piece of silver. It has good silver. Kesef atev means pure silver. I'm sorry, in such and such measure. I just gave the example with milligrams, but he doesn't use milligrams. It just means this is how you say it, and that's how you sell. That's how you that's the transactions around silver or other precious metals. It all comes down to how pure it is. I think in the diamond business they have, what is it called? There's clarity, carat, color, and what's the fourth thing? The four C's.
That's a tough one.
No. It's a known one. Clarity, color, carat. Okay, whatever. I think there too, when diamonds are sold, that's how they measure it. You know how pure of a diamond it is. Like the purest diamond that is almost like 100% gem is obviously rare, because every diamond does have sigim in it, has the impurities we're talking about. So bottom line is, so this is the mashal he gives. That's why it's called Bechina. Because you're not talking about Atzilus itself. You're talking about Atzilus encompasses many levels. And the Bechina is basically, what he says there, it's not defined by a particular level. It's defined by an entirety that has a measure of so-and-so, a ratio, as you said.
Hey, Rabbi, it's the cut, color, clarity, and carat. It's a 4 C's: cut, color, clarity, and carat.
Cut, that was it. Cut, color, clarity, and carat. Right, carat. Yeah, I think I'm not okay. I think it's the clarity is what I'm referring to, perhaps. So too, it's with the 10 spheres of Atzilus. That what? That they're all really part of one essence, one essential entity. So it's one entity that has 10 faculties, just like he said here, one piece of silver that has a certain amount of silver has other things in it. That's what he meant by the word Bechina. The Bechina means that it's one entity with parts in it. So it has one entity, it has 10 faculties, the faculty of Chachma, the faculty of Bina. And even though they're Eidus in Kalim, which means there's a structure here, Hakol hu alakus mamish. It's all pure godliness. It's like all pure silver. So that's why he calls it Bechina, because Bechina means we're not talking about a particular entity. We're talking about an entirety of one whole that has different aspects to it. That's how he's explaining it. So therefore, yes, it has. So there's two ways to look at something. You can look at something as being made up of parts. Let's say you go ahead, you take different parts and you make a machine out of it. That's not an etzem echad that's made of parts. That's you took a bunch of parts, separate parts, and you turned it into a cohesive piece of engineering. But when it comes to the spheres of Atzilus, he says, no, it's one etzem, which is Elikus. Elikus has 10 ways of expressing himself, 10 faculties, so to speak. Like I mentioned before with the human body, same thing with the soul. It's one soul. It's not a soul that's made up of parts. We don't say the soul is a compound and a sum of the parts. It's one etzem that has 10 different forces that come out of it. So in that sense, when you're on that level, that's what he's meaning, that it's not a chalkus mamish in that sense. Hakolu alakus mamish. And he goes further in the parentheses and he says, Va'kelim hen kahadein kamsa de levusha menei. This is an expression from Medish. It's like a kamsa. Kamsa is, some people interpret it as snail. Some people interpret it as a turtle. But bottom line, it's an animal that has its shell, its keli, is made of itself. It's not like, for example, when you put on a garment, so the garment you could remove, or you can dress yourself in the garment. But these animals, their garment, so to speak, their shell is minei bay, is very much part of who they are. So you could have a keli that's separate from the oil. Let's say you pour water into a cup, or wine into a kos, into a kos. So the water and the cup are not one. The cup is not made out of the water, and the water is not made out of the cup. You bring the two entities together, oil and keli. But there are situations where the keli is an extension of and a part of the oil. The Alter Rebbe brings it in Tanya as well. It's a deeper level of achdus, that even the keli is an extension, so to speak, of the oil. In this case, kadein kamsa, the levusha menebe. Snail, I think, is the common translation of kamsa. A snail, as I said, I think a turtle is similar character. I think there's also, what is it called? An armadillo. There are a few other animals that have, when I looked this up, I think the different translations, they bring different options. I think snail is the one that is the most commonly used. Valkain, hakol etzem echad. So therefore, in Atzilus, everything is one entity. It's not like high, we still have to understand, so how is it different than higher than Atzilus, where we said there's not a chalkus altogether? We'll get to that. But right now, he's saying that there is a structure, but the structure is defined by the etzem, not the other way around. And the parts are essentially an extension of the etzem echad. That's Atzilus. So it's a form of an interface between the chalkus and etzem. We're going to stop here. He's going to continue about higher than Atzilus. We'll do that tomorrow, the next class. But I'll stop here. Any questions? I will say that it's very clear that he's leading to come to explain what the Alter Rebbe says in Kenesha Yoyer in Kutei Torah, that the Eibishter is Ein Sham Pirud Ben Riyah L'Shmiya. If I feel and sense that the Rebbe Rashab is, and we discussed it, we asked the question, what's the point? And we also said Chaz v'Shalom. What's the point? There's no separation between Riyah and Shmiya, and that's why by Mattan Torah the Eden saw what they heard and they heard what they saw, because there are two different faculties, Riyah and Shmiya, and yet there was an achdus there. And that's why there was no distinction how these senses work. There was like the wires crossed and went back to the etzem, where Riyah and Shmiya both originate from, before they broke down into two different senses or two different faculties. That's what he's coming to explain. What is interesting also, if any of you ever go back to Ayin Beis, to basically, I believe it's almost in the beginning of the Hemshech, I would say around chapter 10 or 15, in that area, he also discussed, or a little later maybe, 16 or 17, chapter 16, where he talks about also Reinus and Ishma. There he also talks about the 10 hidden spheres, and the highest levels, the spheres become all like one. Here he's discussing it like an Atzilus, but this goes back. I think the Rebbe Rashab refers to it even. A little later, he says the commotion is barely ill, and that is probably to the beginning of the Hemshech. So what's interesting is that Rebbe Rashab is referring to themes that go back to the beginning. We're talking about now 1,400 pages ago, 1,400 pages ago. So it's part of understanding how it's all coming together, the central theme of interface of Ayin Beis. That's critical to keep that in mind, even as we get into the details of Matat and Malachim and Neshamis and so on. Okay, just an additional point. So we're going to stop here by Akol Etzem Echad, page 1448.